is what are the challenges, what are the current challenges that Afghan women and girls face? And how can these challenges be dealt with in ways that will make a difference to the lives so to speak. He's based in Kabul. He went back after the Taliban takeover. And as such, what would be very interesting, Omar, to understand, do the Taliban understand the implications of their policies, the impact it's having on half the population of Afghanistan on women and girls? Is there any potential at all for them to moderate their stance? The hurdles that they've placed on some of the progress and advances that women and girls had made over 20 years. Possible policy.
Thank also the organizer of the Asma Jahangir conference for extending their invitation to me. And it's such a pleasure to be here, as always. Tough questions, tougher in particular because of not only of the subject, but where we live currently. And so we have to be mindful of the response, and it should be understood that the response will be measured response. Let me again come directly to the question: do the Taliban understand the implications to them into the country of their restrictive policies? I would think they do. I not only the immediate response they receive, but also in the context of 40 years. Different regimes, including theirs, came and saw that restrictive policies and measures with respect to women have not only helped the country, hasn't helped them either. So I would say a majority of the Taliban believe that they are, particularly with respect to women education and with respect to women's work, they're not handling it well. They're on the wrong path right there. And I should also go a step further, and I would say the wish of a majority of them would be that they find within themselves the flexibility in the ability to change on this particular subject. So that's one. Is there a potential for them to change? Again, precisely that understanding is a potential, and it's because of that potential that people such as myself, and more importantly, brave women, very few of them, and we are lucky to have Madam Mahbooba Siraj with us here, have decided to remain in Kabul. Um, if I didn't have, let's say, a hope that there is a possibility for change, then I'm not going to risk being there. Um, Engaging with the Taliban, interacting with them, bringing up that not only there's certain other policies that they had pursued in the past and that they're currently pursuing, and others pursued and have failed, is not going to bring them success. And they're shooting themselves in the foot. The fact that they do listen to us, not yet doing anything about it, should be taken again as something positive, and that is how I look at it. Not only in face-to-face meetings, again being in Kabul, we do give interviews on this subject, quite very loudly saying that women's rights, women's education, women's opportunity issue is not just a women's issue. It's a country's issue. It's everybody's issue. In this 21st century, for any country not to allow their women education, not to allow them work, is just not normal. It is it's a state that doesn't look like a state. It's one big prison for everybody, not just women. So putting it in that context to them, and putting it also arguing based on religion, that there is no religious rationale for restrictions. There's no cultural rationale for restrictions. There's no logistical rationale for this, and quite strongly arguing that, and they are on the weak side, arguing against, and that's why you get with most of the leaders when you present this case, they cannot argue against women's education. They cannot argue against women's work based on religion, based on culture, based on logistics and all that. At the end, let me say, I think it is not, in my personal opinion, I don't think it is not as religious as they present it. I don't think it is as political as they present it. Um, I think it is something internal. I think it's something internal. Certain leaders would want to show that they're the ones in control, um, and a better indication is to stick to an issue that everybody else would say they will not have an issue with them, and yet it becomes an issue and it gets stuck. So at the end, I remain optimistic, I remain hopeful, and that's why we continue to interact, continue to have a dialogue on this and other issues. And we do hope that there comes flexibility, not in a distant future, but in near future. Thank you.
Very much. So basically, what you're saying is that a dialogue with them on the ground could at least get the Taliban leadership or policymakers to begin to understand the need to change their policies, that it's in their interest to do so. I should actually also have introduced myself. I am not Naseem Zahra. My name is Samina Ahmed. I'm the South Asia Director and the Senior Asia Advisor of the International Crisis Group. But let me go on to somebody far more important than myself in this discussion, which is Mehbooba Siraj. We talked about the brave women, and I think there's everybody in this room and in Afghanistan and around the world who would acknowledge the courage of Afghan women, particularly Afghan women who've opted to stay on and fight the good fight in the country. It's a huge challenge, a huge, I would say, also a huge opportunity to be the voice of women and girls who are struggling so hard to regain their civic space. Mehbooba, along with, of course, being a rights activist and one of the strongest voices for women's rights, was also the founder of the Afghan Women's Network. She was a journalist, and the reports that come through is of all the professions and all the civic spaces that have been lost to women, possibly journalism has been the worst hit. So that voice and the face of women is disappearing, physically, but also virtually. And we've seen that change, Mehbooba, over the last 20 years. It was that voice that of women that was heard and seen by Afghans countrywide. How much of a loss has that been to promoting just society? And how difficult would it be for women to regain that space? Do you see opportunities? Do you see a way forward to regain some of that lost space? Please, Mehbooba.
Thank you, Samina Jan. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. I am really honored to be here and be able to talk about the women and girls of my beloved Afghanistan. And I would like to thank Samina Jan for giving me this opportunity, and also Asma Jahangir's foundation, and the fact that I'm here being invited by them. I'm really honored. I'm an activist. I've been doing that since 2003. I came back from exile in Afghanistan, and I've been working ever since then with the women of Afghanistan. The group of women of Afghanistan that today are at the forefront of all of the fights and everything that they have achieved, they grew up in front of me. And I'm extremely honored to be a part of raising such an amazing group of young women that they've reached places. And they first, when I arrived in Afghanistan, I can tell you the voices of Afghan women were so tiny that you could not hear them. I mean, they were the tiniest, lowest voices. And I saw the same women roar in the international meetings in the arena while talking about Afghanistan. And that gave me such a hope. And August 15, 2021, I saw the democracy that I worked for, the Afghanistan that I had such a hopes for, that we will be doing things, different things, moving forward, collapse in front of me in 24 hours. In 24 hours, a democracy died. I have never seen anything like it in my life. It was just gone. And after that, it has been this constant struggle to prove to whoever is around us that the women of Afghanistan are here, they're here to stay, they exist, and they cannot be ignored. But the women of Afghanistan, unfortunately, in the eyes of the government that is ruling Afghanistan today, they have completely vanished. They are erased. Nobody is even looking at them. Nobody looks at us. I cannot tell you what an unbelievable feeling that is. That when you go into a place and you are facing people and nobody looks at you. It's beyond comprehension. But this is what it is. Education is something that we don't have any access to. The women of Afghanistan, from class up to 6 they do, but from 6 onwards they don't. University this year, the concours examination, which is the entry level, I believe was the last group that went to do the concours examination, because we don't have another class going up to go for the concours examination next year. So this is it. Whatever we have, they entered. There is no more. So it's like, how is it possible for a country with the population of 20 million women, that the women have absolutely no right. No right to move, no right to advance, no right to take place, no right to education, nothing. But that's a reality, unfortunately. The only one thing is that as dark and as, how shall I say, hopeless and helpless that whole reality is, the Afghan women have not given up. And that is something that I absolutely salute to them. They really, my sisters have not given up. And they will never give up. That much I can promise you. So we are going to fight for it. We are going to raise our voices. We are going to ask for it. And we'll see when the changes are going to happen. But it better happen sooner rather than later, because later it might be too late for Afghanistan. We might not even have a country to be fighting for it. So that is my worry as an Afghan woman, as an activist, and as a member of the human society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mehbooba. I think it's in these words that we see hope for Afghanistan, for the women and girls of Afghanistan, that women will not give up the fight. We have one of our panelists and an old friend online, Seema Samar. Seema was the former Minister for Women's Affairs in Afghanistan, but also, let's not forget, the chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. Seema, please welcome to this panel and to this audience, who I know would be extremely interested in hearing what you think has happened to the rights landscape in particular. The changes in the laws, the changes, in fact, there is no constitution. There was one. Rights were guaranteed for the first time, actually, in Afghanistan's history. You had legal advancements made. Now, there has been quite obviously regression. How grave is the situation? How hopeful are you that there will be an opportunity to push back, to regain some of those lost legal rights in particular that gave women and girls protection? Seema, the floor is yours. Seema, will you please unmute? Seema, would you please unmute?
Do you hear me? Salam and good afternoon to everyone. Samina, it's very nice to see you. I wish I was there to hug you after so long. And I start by saying that how much we miss Asma in the region and also in Pakistan. And how important is to continue her work and her dream in our region and in Pakistan as well. I think the issue of women's rights, I think the space for women's rights is shrinking everywhere in all the countries, but in different level, of course. In our case, I think it's not first time. It was the same, even worse in the first Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And this time, people were lobbying that they are changed. They are admitting that they made a mistake and they will not continue that kind of mistake. But it's difficult to say. Also, some people who really argue that the Taliban brought security in Afghanistan and they brought peace in Afghanistan, I have to say that it's not. We forget that the Taliban was the reason, were the reason for insecurity and for violation of human rights. So the security that they claim that they brought is kind of a graveyard security. So nobody should resist and nobody should raise their voice. There's we lost a lot of things, including the achievement on the institution that we made. As you know, you were in Afghanistan when I started the Ministry of Women's Affairs and then the Human Rights Commission. Both of them were started from scratch. I'm not saying that the Ministry of Women's Affairs were able to solve all the problem of Afghan women, but symbolically that was something really giving hope to women. And we were all hoping that it will promote democracy in Afghanistan and gender equality in the country. The truth is that we like it or not, if the half of the population doesn't have their rights and their access to health and education, that country is not going to have sustainable development and not going to have sustainable peace. There's no doubt on it. It's not something written and we dream about it. It's the reality of the life, and we have to accept that reality. So we lost those institutions. I mean, the Ministry of Women's Affairs, which is symbolically something hopeful for the women, and importantly, the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, which was one of the best institutions in the country. It's not I'm saying because I was the chairperson for 17 years. It's the truth. It's the acknowledgement by the international community in all the national institutions of human rights, including your Human Rights Commission, which was established much younger than our commission. Then you could see that after so many years, it was first time in our history that we had equal rights for women and men in the Constitution, and the word woman was in the Constitution, and that is lost. Women were part of Loya Jirga. Women were part of the constitution making, drafting, and ratifying the constitution. All those were gone. And also first time that we criminalized the domestic violence against women, and we had a law. Of course, we had some conservative people who used religion as a tool to restrict the rights of women in the country. It was not passed by the parliament, but it was first time, as I said, that we criminalized the domestic violence against women in Afghanistan. And then we had the special prosecutor office at the Attorney General office, and also with their branch in the different provinces that were dealing with the domestic violence and violence against women, for elimination of violence against women in the country. All of them are closed. All of them are closed. So the increase of poverty, the increase of lack of job opportunity, the increase of restriction on women's movement and ability to work, they were sent home practically. Only medical doctors are allowed, the staff are allowed to work, and also women who are teachers. We already had a shortage of health staff, female health staff. So the one who could leave, they already left the country. It's same for the teachers. So why how can we try to legalize or legitimize this kind of a government who practically wants to use the religion and tradition in Afghanistan and put chain on the hand and feet of women? How can we legitimize this? This is one issue that we all know that it is not in Islam. Everybody in Islam born with equal dignity, and they don't believe that. It is also in Islam, we all know that the first message to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. That Iqra doesn't exist in Afghanistan or exists up to 6th grade. So we all know that educated women can be a better Muslim because we know how to read the Quran and how to to see and use the religion for comfort of the society rather than for using it as a prison warden. So now the religion is kind of a prison warden for the people in Afghanistan. So that is something that but all our neighboring countries, including Pakistan, which unfortunately had some kind of a role by training these people. And they will see the backlash. And I hope that the women in Pakistan and the people who believe on human rights, universality of human rights, will stand against all these kind of repressive mentality and fight for equal rights for everyone, because it's not only for us. It's against our dignity. It's against human dignity. How can they explain? How can they legitimize who they are? This heroes are born from their mothers. So that is the truth. I don't know how talks and dialogue. I am in favor of dialogue. I don't want to in any means we should not start again an armed conflict in the country, although it is there. And I also believe on physics and science that when you have an action, you have reaction, because we saw during Khalqin Parchamis in Afghanistan, when they start to restrict people's rights, people started with stone and stick to fight against them. So they should learn from the history of the country, and they should not continue that. So far, they do not show any flexibility, I have to say. But I hope it will be enough pressure on them to accept the reality in Afghanistan, not only for women, but also the other minorities. I have to say that there is systematic violence and massacre against the Hazaras in Afghanistan. Not only the Hazaras, Sufis were also the Sikh and Hindu that we had in Afghanistan. And if they claim that they are the state, they're responsible to protect. They, unfortunately, with their hatred kind of speeches through social media and during the Friday prayers or any other Jamaat we have in Afghanistan, is really encouraging the attacks on minorities and the Shias. And that is also something that we have to really take in consideration, that a country cannot survive this way. So the people and the human rights of the people should be on top of the agenda. Of course, I keep saying that it's Afghanistan case is a collective failure of Afghan people, Afghan government, and the international community, including the regional powers, so the regional countries or neighboring countries, because it has an impact on all of us. So I stop here. Thank you. It's a lot to say. It's difficult to explain Afghanistan in 1 hour. So thank you so much.
You've done a very good job of explaining the realities of Afghanistan in your short presentation. In fact, all three of our panelists have. We were expecting 2 other panelists to join us virtually. I'm not sure if that's happened, but I think we have enough of a representation of views and knowledge and experience in these 3 panelists. No, that's okay. It's okay. While it would have been very good to hear Pashtana's voice and the British MPs, but as I said, between these 3 incredibly knowledgeable citizens of Afghanistan, with their knowledge and the experience, I think we have enough to discuss. But before we open up an open discussion, the dialogue really with the audience. I think these are important issues that all three have brought up. The first, which was Omar's hope that through constant dialogue with the Taliban, we might be in a better position to explain to them the price that they will have to pay for their regressive policies, and that it is in their interest to moderate their ways, not necessarily just in the interests of Afghanistan citizens, which should be their responsibility in the first place, since they claim to be the government of Afghanistan. But if it's going to be self-interest and power, and that is driving their policies, then to get them to understand, well, legitimacy is going to be elusive, and stability will be elusive until you understand the need to change the way you look at the rights of your population. Am I right in saying that, Omar? Mehbooba's, I think, very important points that were made, which is this disappearing voice. Women, I was in Afghanistan for the first time after the intervention in early 2002, and over the years, I heard that voice, as you said, from a whisper into a roar. The ability to silence women, to take them back to the past, and I think that was the message, if I'm correct, that you gave. It's not going to be that easy, and that women will continue to fight back, and that sustained struggle is what is needed within Afghanistan. And I think Seema's point that it was even worse under the first Taliban regime, because at that point in time, the international community was not as engaged with Afghan citizens, and the rights of Afghan women and girls was not a priority. Counterterrorism was a priority at best when the first Taliban regime was in power. Whereas now, Seema, if you could expand on that a little bit, because you said pressure and sustained pressure on the Taliban would be one way of women and girls regaining some civic space, some economic rights, and some hope for a better future. If I read you correctly,
Yep.
is that what were you saying? Seema, I'm going to
Yeah.
let you.
Yes. Thank you, Samina, for asking this question. I think any government or any authority requires legitimacy. Legitimacy comes from the acknowledgement or participation of people and acceptance by people, and also by the international community. We are living in a 21st century. It is not possible to say that we are living in an island called Afghanistan. So we do, and we run our own, our people and the country in our own way. That is not possible, because it's the overall, I mean, technology, everything, they made the other countries or all the world as a village. So we cannot ignore that. I think the first Taliban government, we need to remember that time also, that the international community, not the regional countries, but the international community actually forgot in Afghanistan. They were not even discussing the terrorism. You remember that in 1998, when there was the missiles attack under Clinton, after the bombing in Tanzania and Kenya on their embassy, and they attack Afghanistan in Sudan by thinking that they would attack the Al-Qaeda base in the country. The only three countries, you remember, and it is clear, I don't have to say that, Pakistan, Emirate, and Saudi recognized the Taliban regime. And that was the only three countries. And by the way, the level of education and the distraction was so high in the country that the people were not really only Herati women came one day on the street, and then they were pushed out by force, and they could not continue the protest. But this time, it's a different Afghanistan after 20 years, when the people really exercise their basic rights in the country in a way. I'm not saying that it was good election, and unfortunately, our government was corrupt up to above their neck, above our head. That is clear, and that was one of the reasons that the Taliban was partially took the power, because of the corruption and nepotism in the government, and also lack of political will for real implementation of human rights in the country. So that was the only three countries. This time, even those countries are holding back, including your country. I mean, everybody knows, we all know, and the world know that they were in Pakistan, they were using Pakistani passport, they were traveling from Pakistan. And I would say that, we are so grateful to the Pakistani people who hosted more than 6 million refugees. And once again, you have a lot of influx of refugee in Afghanistan. So that is the truth. And if they really wants to be legitimate government and recognized not by the international community, but by the people also, they have to understand that governance is not the decrees to put today announce that women cannot go to the park in certain days, and tomorrow you can announce that the woman has to cover their face, otherwise the male member of the family will punish for it. And they encourage and promote it and embolden the patriarchy. Remember that after this hijab issue, when they took it very, very seriously, Iran government, which was, slightly, I would say, I've been to Iran once in 2020, they were, it was relaxed, I would say, the hijab. And they started to the Afghan Taliban regime remind them that there is something on hijab. So they've been more aggressive. And we see the women in Iran and their protests. It's almost a month. And it's good that the other people, the male from Iran also standing on that. But what's happened to us, it's because of this promotion of patriarchy, because of this aggressive, violent position of the so-called woman. And woman comes in 50. When I was in the university during the Russian, we were hundreds of thousands, I would say, all the high school of the girls and the boys and all the university students, the absolute majority university students, we were on the street against the Russian invasion and against that regime. So the number of the girls protesters are really small, but still, they really take the risk of their life and their families.
Yeah. Well,
Also.
that's
I think those kind of protests should be supported. Those
Sure.
kind of resistance should be supported.
Right.
And I stop here.
If I could, Seema, open this up to the floor, so that I'm sure that there are a lot of people here who are interested in hearing what all three of you think are the challenges, and what you think is possibly a way to deal with these challenges?
Ale.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Sorry to bother you.
Could you please also identify yourself?
Sorry, there was a call from your meeting that I should join Zoom. I'm already there, I think.
Hi, my name's Emma Clark. I work for AFP I'm a journalist covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think we can see over the last year that the Taliban can work effectively without international recognition. I think they are aware of what the international community are demanding and they don't really care. So Mahbooba Siraj, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is an effective role that the international community can play, given that dialogue hasn't worked so far?
I think one. As I said, it's a collective failure and it should be collective approach.
Yes, thank you, Seema. If Mehbooba could also, because I think
Okay.
these three questions
Okay.
are aimed at her. Yes.
I stop here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. The international community actually can play a big role. The international community, don't forget, is the one that made it possible for them to come to Afghanistan, be who they are, have the power that they have. They were created by them. So that same international community has a lot of leverage that they can actually play if they think for the willness of Afghanistan, if that is important. But unfortunately, what is happening with the international community is that Afghanistan is not in their whole, in that picture of what they want to do. Whatever is good for them, if there is anything that is useful to them in one way or another, then this is a discussion that one can go in and will take us days and nights. They are thinking of that. And that is why the Taliban knows that, and the Taliban are taking advantage of it. It's not that the international community cannot do it. The Taliban knows that the international community is not doing it. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Omar, would you agree with that? He's dodging that question. The gentleman there, and then if I could take two questions, and after that, Tahir.
My question is from Sir Omar. I'm working for human rights-based organization. I have already worked in different human rights-based organizations. Currently, I'm also a member of Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. My question is to Sir Omar that we mostly hear that there are some good Taliban and some bad Taliban. So please tell me that Pakistan's Taliban are good and Afghanistan's Taliban are good, then where are bad Talibans? Please tell me.
Thank you. If I could take one more question. Tyra?
Good afternoon, Salaam Alaikum. My name is Tahira Abdullah, and my question is addressed to all three of you panelists. That was when the US government bilaterally started talks exclusively with the TTA, based out of the UAE and Doha, Qatar, etc. And they set up offices there. Many of you were in high positions in Afghanistan. I know you're a journalist, and His Excellency, the Ambassador, and Her Excellency, the former minister. I would like to know if you think, in your opinion, wisdom with hindsight, was there sufficient resistance within post-TTA 1 Afghanistan 2001 to August 2021? Was there sufficient resistance from the rights organizations, rights activists, senior people in a non-theocratic government of Afghanistan? Her Excellency said it was very corrupt, and yes, we know that. We have our own corruption. But to us looking into your country from the outside, perhaps there were not enough voices of resistance and protest, whether women or men or both as rights activists. Thank you.
Would you have a first go at answering both the questions?
With respect to the first question, we take Taliban as a reality. To get into the business of good and bad is not the time, and neither is it productive. Good and bad, we will categorize the policies. Their policies against women are bad. Their policies with respect to whether that's education, whether work inclusivity, certain religious interpretation, their unwillingness for political inclusivity, and so on and so forth. And it's bad for the country. It's bad for them as well. At the end, they will have to be interested to be seen as a legitimate government by the Afghan population. They will have to be interested to be seen as a legitimate government by the international community. And the policies that they're pursuing right now is not helping with that. Internally, that legitimacy is not there. And externally, that pressure will continue. And it's hard to imagine how such a system that goes into such internal and external isolation will sustain itself. And so again, based on policies and based on actions and based on what they do and based on what is expected of the government in the 21st century, we will continue the dialogue, and like I said, we'll judge them as a whole based on what they pursue with respect to policies and inclusivity. I didn't understand the second question. To be honest with you, you can help me with that. If there was a sufficient resistance during the 20 years against the TTA or during their time when they first came in?
I think what she was referring to was when the negotiations were ongoing with the Taliban. They were calling she was calling the TTA.
No. What we had was, you see, the Afghan state collapsed not because of the strength of the Taliban. It collapsed because of the weakness of the government and of the political setup there. We had a very divided political setup. Internally, very divided. This government of national unity was anything but a government of unity. It was a government of divisions. And outside, the political leadership was extremely divided. The international community was extremely divided. The international community in the Afghan government were extremely divided. So the field was one of divisions. And it is because of their divisions and the lack of trust between all these different sides that Taliban rode to the collapse of the previous regime and into victory. Now we look back and say how it happened, but it should have been predicted. Personally, I was not in the government, I was in a opposition figure. The issue of a collapse of a state is not something that totally surprised me. No, I've raised it myself in big gatherings and also in interviews and also in smaller settings. The last time I seriously raised the collapse of the state with President Ghani was in April 2021. With President Karzai, it was December 2002, With Khalilzad and his team, it was June 6th, 2001. I say the state is going towards a collapse. Do you see that or not? Maybe they saw it, or maybe they didn't. But it was expected, unfortunately.
Thank you so very much. Mehbooba, would you agree that there is such a thing as good Taliban, bad Taliban to begin with?
That is the question of the year. You know, the world has been calling it the Taliban 0.01, 0.20, 2021. I don't know these numbers that they are giving to the Taliban. There are different groups of Taliban. There were always, there is no doubt. There were the ones that they were in Peshawar. There were the ones that they were in Quetta, and there were the ones that they were in Kandahar. But they were there. They were the Taliban. They're all Taliban. But at the same time, the good Taliban and the bad Taliban, there is no such a thing. It's just that I do believe that they do have a difference of ideology right now, especially when it comes to the education of girls. A group of them do agree with it, and a group of them don't agree with it. So whether those Taliban are the good Taliban or they are the bad Taliban, I don't know. But I do know that there is a part of the Taliban who do agree with the girls' education, and another group of them that don't agree with the girls' education. So that has actually created a bit of a rift in between them also. So maybe that will be maybe for our benefit one day or for our demise. I don't know, depending on how this whole thing is going to be played by the forces that are around us, by everybody, by everyone that decides on the future of Afghanistan. I don't know how they're going to be playing it. So the result is going to be like that. But right now, I really don't know, and we are just waiting and waiting and still waiting, and I don't know how much longer we can really do that. But that's that's the way things are at the moment. But the ones of us, like for example me, and there's whoever is there that they are like me and they're staying in Afghanistan and they're raising the voices of the women of Afghanistan. We keep on doing that. I just want to say that I have promised myself till my last breath, I will do it. So,
Thank you so very much. Is Seema still online?
Yes, I am.
Oh, wonderful.
Can I jump
So,
in?
yes, please. And I'm going to give you the last question of
Yes,
the questions that were asked, which was
yes.
it the weakness of the state and state structures that gave the Taliban that opening? Was it internal divisions within the ruling institutions, and the divisions on the way forward? And if that's the case, how can you see a unity of purpose once again emerging in a constructive manner?
On the first question, let me say that the definition of good and bad should be really looked at. What is the definition of good and bad? On the second question, yes, I was in a high position. I was the chairperson of Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, and I was loud. When I was even minister, Samina, you know yourself that I was calling for accountability and justice. And I'm still calling for accountability and justice for war crimes and crimes against humanity and action of genocide. So that is what I did. And I was witness that we had the biggest gathering and the biggest national inquiry in the Human Rights Commission on women, peace, and security in the peace process. It was not only from 2018. We started as soon as the government started to talk with the Taliban, or the international community started to talk to Taliban, because from that time we were saying it should be inclusive and everybody should be involved. No regime can be sustained if they don't have the support of the people. So what, unfortunately, during Dr. Ghani, he started to divide the people. he started to divide the ethnicities among themselves in order to rule. I remember that I was discussing this with the British ambassador on that time. I said, it's an old say of the British divide and rule. And he laughed and he looked at me. He said, well, Asma, I think it's still working. So he divided the Hazaras, he divided the Uzbeks, he divided the Tajik, he divided the Pashtuns. Very honestly. I mean, he divided everyone. He wanted him and a few of his close, young, experienced people around him. And he was so proud of himself. I think he was not able to manage the peace process. If I was him, I would do it differently. As Dr. Minister Zakhelwal mentioned, the Taliban is the reality. We should have done with this, first to acknowledge the reality and then deal with the reality in a strong political will, in a principle, human rights value-based approach.
This would be possibly the best note to end on, which is dealing with the Taliban.
Thank you so much. I'm done.
In a principled way, and with a clear goal in mind on the way ahead. Thank you so very much to all three of you. I think we've all learned so much and have some ground for optimism. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, we will continue. Thank you. But you need to stand with us, Samina.